Jesus is central. And that's what Jesus meant the church to be, a brotherhood. It's why he chose 12 men to start it. It's amazing that we go for the women and children today, whereas Jesus, to build his church, went for men. And working men, most of whom worked with their hands. There was only one pen pusher among them. But he chose 12 ordinary working men, and he started a church that now numbers 1,500 million. When will we learn to do it Jesus' way? I'll tell you now what I hope will come out of today, that in every church represented here, there will begin a men's discipling program in that church. It worries me when I go to church after church and say, let me see your program of activities. And it's often quite a long list. There are things for babies, for playgroups, for the youth, for pensioners, women's coffee mornings. And I look in vain in 9 churches out of 10 for anything for men. And yet that was how Jesus began at the beginning. Well, now, I discovered that most churches had more women than men. In the last 2 parish churches I've preached in, it was 5 women to 1 man. And he looked as if he'd been dragged there. But the average of churches I've been in is 2.5 to 1. I don't mean there's half a woman there, but 5 to 2, in other words. It's the average. There are some that are a little better. But why is it that the church is so lacking in men and become what I call lifeboat churches, women and children first? Well, I began to ask why. I've always been someone who wanted to know why. I began it as a little boy. My parents got fed up with me. Why, Daddy? Why, Mummy? And I've never stopped being like that. And I want to know why things are as they are. And I began to ask, why is it that the churches seem so poor in men, on the men's side? Remembering that in the Old Testament, when God wanted to find out the strength of the people of Israel, he said, count the men over 20 who are able to fight. And I use that as a rough and ready gauge. I'm invited to go in to churches and look at them and see them as hopefully the Lord sees them and give them some counsel and advice. And one of the first things I do is count the men over 20 who are fit to fight the battles of the Lord. And that gives you a very good idea as to the real strength. I make no apology for saying I believe the strength of any church is in its men. And that's why I've been concentrating on that. So why is there this lack? Well, from the Shetlands, I went to college, studied theology in Cambridge, nearly lost my faith. Certainly lost my faith in the Bible, but didn't lose my faith in God. They taught us to read the Bible with a pair of scissors and cut it up and cut things out. But anyway, I managed to hold on to my faith and came back out. But again, into these churches where it was largely women and children. Why? After a bit, the Methodist Church told me that they wanted me to be an evangelist. And they gave me a caravan and a mobile cinema van to pull it and sent me off to the South Yorkshire coalfields. Now, this was before the days of King Arthur, but it was still pretty tough up there. And I went down the pits and into the pubs and clubs and tried to evangelize. And some came to the Lord. But after a year, I knew that I was not an evangelist. It's great to find out what you're not. And then you stop trying to be what you're not. Find out what God wants you to be and go after that. But don't try to be what he doesn't want you to be. That's a killer. And I meet too many Christians trying to do what God has given somebody else a job to do. And I knew that I'm not an evangelist. Mind you, I don't regret that year. I learned a great deal about myself. We did see conversions, and I got a wife out of it. So it wasn't wasted. But I was coming back to the caravan at the end of the year, and I said, Lord, I'm sure you don't want me to continue in this. Sure you got something else for me, but it's been a wonderful learning experience. Thank you for it. But what do you want me to do? And as clear as that, he said, there'll be a letter waiting in the caravan for you. I couldn't wait to get there. And I got to the caravan, opened the door, and there was one blue envelope on the floor. So I picked it up feverishly and opened it and had to sit down. At the top of the letter was the Royal Air Force crest. We are looking for a chaplain in the Royal Air Force. 9 men have applied for the vacancy, but we want to add your name to the list of interviewees. Are you willing? So I searched the caravan to see if there was another envelope somewhere. But there wasn't. And so I had to assume this was what God wanted me to do. The last thing, I'd never been in the forces. There was still conscription in my day, or national service, but if you were on a farm, you were exempt. Butter was more important than guns immediately after the war. So I'd never been called up and didn't want to be. Anyway, I went down to London and was interviewed. I'll never forget that interview. It was a big room and a long table covered with a green cloth, and behind it sat officers of the Navy, Army and Air Force. Sorry, Royal Navy, Army and Royal Air Force. And in uniform. And one single chair in front of this table. I took one look through the door and thought, I'm not going in there. I shall always be grateful to the sergeant who was on duty at the door to see us in one by one. As I passed him, he whispered, "Imagine them in their underwear, sir." And I went in, and I saw them all in string vests, and I lost all my fear of them. I relaxed, I enjoyed it, and so they gave me the job. And they said, go immediately to the CME, the Central Medical Establishment in Holborn, and have a medical. And I found myself going through a medical with aircrew. And I remember going into a room stark naked, not a stitch of clothing on, and there was a doctor in a white coat sitting behind a desk, and he looked up and he said, "Ah, Padre, come on in." And I've been trying to figure out ever since. I thought, do I have a trademark around here? Now, this is a men's meeting, so I can tell you the rest of it. I happened to tell one of the other men having a medical what he'd said. And he said to me, well, at least he didn't say, "Come on in, Rabbi." Anyway, I'll leave that with you. So I went into another room, and this was a man saying, "Now I need to test your hearing. Repeat every word I say. Fish." I said, "Fish." "Chips." I said, "Chips." "No." I said, "Look, I'm going to be a chaplain. I can't say words like that." He said, "You're in," and he signed the certificate. And I found myself facing a congregation of hundreds of men. And I had all my old sermons in my pocket, and they went off like a lead balloon. And I realized that I had been adapting myself to preaching to women and children. And most preachers in this country have done the same. And it's quite different talking to men. Men want it straight from the shoulder. They don't want pussyfooting. They don't want it dressed up in nice language. They want it, "What are you saying? Even if I disagree with you, I want to know what you're really saying. Come on, out with it." And I had to throw my sermons away. And that 3 years in the RAF as a chaplain did wonders for me. Unfortunately, it's made me a little too blunt in speech, and I find that civilian churches tend to react against that from time to time. They don't like outspoken preachers, I've discovered. So I'm usually introduced as no stranger to controversy. And all that means is that I tell it as it is, and I speak it out. But I found that that's what men want, even if they come and disagree with you about it, because they want it straight. So those 3 years had a profound effect on my ministry, and I came back into civilian life determined that any church I was pastor of would have as many men as women in it. And that meant asking, why are they not there? And I came up with a number of reasons. Number one, 2 world wars robbed the churches of men. They went away to the war and they didn't come back. I don't mean those who died. I mean those who lived but didn't come back to church. They had seen things and done